Now, with this reading we chose here tonight, it's the latter part of the promise that was made to King David. And, you know, in first principles and so on, we concentrate on verses 9 to 16 about the promise that God gave to David. We don't often look at how David responded to that promise. And one of the things that David did when he responded to that promise was he grabbed hold of that nation of Israel, of which he was a part of, and he made these comments here that Philip read for us. He said, "Who is like your people Israel, God? The one nation on the earth whom God went to redeem to be his people, making himself a name and doing for them great and awesome things, whom you redeemed for yourself. And you established for yourself your people Israel to be a people forever. And you, O Yahweh, became their God." Now that's how David responds to his God, the God of Israel, after receiving that wonderful promise that God gave him. He incorporated the nation of Israel. Now we could just close. You know when you go out somewhere and you stop suddenly and there's a whole group of people, like try this in the Rundle Mall on a busy day, right? And you're just walking along and then suddenly you stop and you look up and you just stand there and you look like that. I'll guarantee you it won't be long before you get a crowd of people standing there thinking, what's he looking at? What's he staring at? And suddenly everyone's, and you're focused on something and they're all going, what's he looking at? I want to see what he is looking at and focus. And I'll guarantee you, plenty of people have done that, and it's amazing to watch how many people just stop and say, what's going on? Well, God, our God, David's God, all the biblical characters of old, their God, which is the same God as ours, is looking at Israel from January the 1st right through to December the 31st. He's watching it. He says, I don't take my eyes off that nation, even today. Right from their birth as a nation, right through their re-establishment of a nation, God does not take his eyes off that nation. Now, if God is looking at that nation, then maybe we ought to stop every now and again and go, we need to look at that nation a little bit more often and involve ourselves. Now, we don't involve ourselves politically. We're not aligned with them in any way, shape or form from a political point of view, although politics is an interesting part of Israel, very confusing but interesting. But from a biblical point of view and the prophecies that God has made about that nation, we connect with that people. You can't help but be connected to it. And so Israel has a very unique bond to Christadelphians and vice versa. So let's throw up a few of the prime movers on both sides, on Israel and on the Christadelphian side of the little connections we have learned to grow up with on both of the sides. So here's some people we all know. Christadelphians on your left, and put some Israeli figures up there on the right. So up there on the right, you've got Theodore Herzl, Cain Wiseman, David Ben-Gurion, first Prime Minister, Golda Meir, the only woman Prime Minister, and the current Prime Minister, Netanyahu. So there's some prime movers, plenty others we could have put up there, but there's some prime movers. On the left there, of course, we've got John Thomas and Robert Roberts. I put Uncle Percy Mansfield, Uncle John, and Jeff Berry. The late Jeff Berry passed away quite a few months ago, was very well connected, as anyone that tuned into his funeral would have seen how well connected he was with Israel. And he was very passionate about that nation. And I learned, I don't know if anyone actually did tune into his funeral, but we all know that Brother Jeff was quite a unique person, exceptionally unique, extremely intelligent, to the point of just mind-blowingly just left everybody for dead with his knowledge, general knowledge even, not just biblical knowledge, but general knowledge. And one of the things that we learnt when we tuned in, we were away overseas at the time, we tuned in his funeral, but it said he actually took on the Israelis in a game called, or a proper show called Mastermind, many, many years ago. I'm thinking back in the 70s, I'm not sure when it was, didn't say the date, but it was obviously a long, long time ago, a show called Mastermind, which the Israelis put on for the absolute elite of their own people. And it's all about their history and everything. Jeff Berry beat all the Jews. He won that whole competition. So we put him up there because you can't not leave him out. But the prime mover of how we got to be connected to Israel obviously starts with Dr. Thomas. So we want to have a little look at how is it that he connected all the dots together and came up with the fact that Israel has to be the heartbeat of our hope. How did it all happen? Well, I'm not going into the story of Dr. Thomas. We all know it. You know, he was heading towards New York to start, or America to start a new life. He wanted to be a doctor over there, leaving England, set sail, shipwreck. Looked like the ship was going to sink, and he looked around at all these people. He wasn't religious himself, even though his dad was a Baptist minister. He wasn't religious. He had not really much interest in religion at all. And what did he do? He, as the ship is about to sink, you know, one woman's crying, we shall all, because it had grounded, it hit a reef and it was already grounded and waves were starting to possibly break it all up. The mast was broken and everyone's screaming and yelling. This is off the coast of Nova Scotia. And all these people were screaming and yelling and carrying on. And one woman said, oh, we're all going to the bottom, we're all going to the bottom. And he said, excuse me, madam, we're already on the bottom. We can't go any further down. But he knew that they were in dire trouble. And everywhere he looked, he see these people praying. He saw the Catholics praying. He saw the Protestants praying to God for deliverance. He saw all these different people praying. And he's going to himself, there seems to be so much confusion going on as to who they're praying to. What's it all about? So he decided, well, this could be my last breath. But he made a little vow, and that little vow was, if I get out of this alive, I don't want to be found in such an uncertain state of mind about what and who God is and what his word is all about. So he made that little promise in his mind that if he got off, I'm going to determine myself to find out what this book is all about. Needless to say, the ship did get off the reef and limped into New York Harbour, and he got off and he started his doctor's abilities to be able to be a doctor and be a surgeon, and his education in that regard. He was already a fully fledged doctor, but to get the credentials in America. But at the same time, he devoted so much attention to the Bible. And the first thing he did was connect himself with other people that were also quite well versed, so he thought at the time, in the Bible. So he met up with these two characters, Alexander Campbell and a little bit later, William Miller. Now, of course, we know that Dr. Thomas was the founding father of the Christadelphians. Alexander Campbell became the Church of Christ, and William Miller the Seventh-day Adventist. Now, he spent a number of years with Alexander Campbell, and it wasn't too long into that tenure of a few years that he started to realise that, hey, what you're teaching and what I'm actually reading and personally studying doesn't match up. There is too many differences here going on, and I don't know whether I like it. So he challenged Alexander Campbell. I'm giving you a very brief summary of this. He challenged Alexander Campbell, and the two of them came at loggerheads. And in the end, basically, Alexander Campbell excommunicated Dr. Thomas from anything to do with their Campbellites known at the time, and basically shunned him. So he bumped into William Miller. He had actually a bit more time for William Miller. He actually found him to be quite a gentleman, albeit virtually believed the same things as Alexander Campbell. So the doctor was in a quandary. What am I doing here? I've listened to all what they're teaching, and I'm doing my personal study, and I just cannot agree to what they're teaching. Now, I want you to understand this. Here's the study aids that Brother Thomas had at that era and that time. He had his Bible, of course. He had Rowland's Ancient History. He had Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and the only concordance available at the time was Cruden's. Strong's wasn't out yet, and neither was Young's. So he had a very basic concordance. That's it. That's what he had. He had history books, he had his Bible, he had a concordance, and wow, did he read from Genesis to Revelation, backwards and forwards, looking, reading, writing, taking notes, comparing it, what Campbellites were saying to what the Millerites were saying, and what other churches are saying, and saying, that doesn't make sense, that does sort of make sense, that doesn't make sense. And it was like a giant big jigsaw puzzle to the doctor. And he was putting all the pieces together over a period of 15 years. This didn't happen overnight, brothers and sisters and young people. This happened over a period of 15 years of absolute solid study, to the point where he virtually had to give away his medical, being a medical doctor, medical practitioner. That really got pushed into the background because he became so involved in this. He never claimed to have a divine visitation. He never claimed to have the Holy Spirit gifts that gave him some sort of a special understanding. He never claimed any of that. All he did was read his Bible and connect the dots slowly but surely. And so all the pieces started coming together. So all the doctrine started coming together. He knew there was no supernatural devil. He knew the Trinity was false. He knew the kingdom was going to be on earth and Christ would return. He understood the promises of the Bible. He connected it all together so brilliantly well. He was so excited about this. 15 years he got to this point, but there was still something missing. There was still one little part of the puzzle that he hadn't quite connected. Just one piece he needed. And it was one day when he was doing his usual readings, didn't have a reading chart then, he would do whatever readings he wanted to do, that's fine, and he was able to, almost like a light bulb moment, see something that he hadn't really considered before. And he read in Romans 8:24, we are saved by hope. He realised that in the Greek means this hope or the hope. What's the hope we're saved by? Then he said, Apostle Paul, heading off to Rome, he put his hands up with his chains on. He said, for the hope of Israel, I am bound with this chain. And it was like, as I said, a light bulb moment, just boom, straight, flashed into his mind. And suddenly he realised that everything he had learnt, everything about this book, the entire book from Genesis to Revelation, everything, Old and New Testament, revolves around the nation of Israel. And he was so excited when he found that out. His first major writing, of course, was The Hope of Israel. Now, here's the interesting thing. He finally connected all the dots and put Israel into the central focus point of his beliefs, his core beliefs. And he did it, brethren and sisters and young people, 13 years before Theodore Herzl was even born, 70 years before the Balfour Declaration, 100 years before the rebirth of Israel, 120 years before Jerusalem was freed, and 176 years ago this year, Israel celebrated, of course, this year their 75th anniversary. Well, he found out all about Israel, connected all the prophecies, was able to write all about their hope, what's going to happen to them, what's it all going to involve. He did it well in advance of any of these events here, because he read his Bible, and as I said, 15 years it took. 15 years of absolute study. And you couldn't hold him down. He was so excited. He'd finally pieced it all together that he was off. He was on a tour of back at his homeland. Sure, there were some people that had started to believe what he had believed towards the latter part of that 15 years. And yes, there were quite a number of Christadelphians, if we'll use that term at this stage. Of course, Christadelphian name came in a little bit later. But they all believed pretty well what Dr. Thomas had been teaching. But he wanted to go home to England and tell them all about it. So his first visit to the UK, 1848 to 1850, 30 months, 2.5 years, was just him and his 10-year-old daughter. His wife was too sick to travel with him. She was too ill. But he took his daughter, who was obviously very spiritually minded, as a very good help for him, and she was a great help, he said, to be able to assist him to start preaching the truth. Now imagine this, brothers and sisters. He gets on a boat, we call it a ship, perhaps a boat more likely, heads back to England, gets off the ship with his Bible in his hand, his daughter of 10 years old, and there's not one Christadelphian there. There's nobody that believes anything that he believes. And he's starting fresh to teach the truth. And he travelled up and down that island 3 times. He spoke to over 30,000 people. He actually got a little bit of a leg up because some of the Campbellites and the Millerites who had heard about Dr. Thomas from when he was in America, had actually graciously gave him some assistance to and allowed him to talk in some of their meeting places, much to the disgust of Alexander Campbell. And that was the start of converting people across to believing what he believed. He gave 250 90-minute lectures. Now, you know, I complain if I get a couple of lectures a year. You think about this man here. He gave on average 2 90-minute lectures every week for 2.5 years. It's not bad, is it? For 2.5 years. And he wrote 2 editions of Elpis Israel, the first, and then he didn't quite get that understanding right in that one, so he rewrote the next edition, which was even longer, and that came out, and many numerous magazine articles, of which there was a 10-year-old boy at the time by the name of Robert Roberts who was reading those articles, those magazines, and he held a lot of private discussions. And the central focus of him preaching was Israel. Now you imagine trying to talk to people about Israel. It wasn't even a nation. What are you talking about the Jews for? What are you talking about the prophecies about Israel and about return of Jesus? What's all this about? Something entirely different. But he excited people and he got people to listen. But it wore him out. It wore him out so much that he's at the age of 45 years old when he returned home, he collapsed when he got in the front door and he was bedridden for 4 weeks. Didn't get out of bed for 4 weeks. Totally exhausted. So he knew the relevance of Israel to his core beliefs, which is our core beliefs. So what I want to do is simplify this a little bit so we can sort of follow it a little bit better as to why the significance of Israel as far as our faith is concerned. I thought we'd put this up there because we all know what that is. This is a breakdown of a push bike, all right? We know the integral parts of a push bike, they're all very important. And if you were to look at that and apply each of those components there with something that we understand as far as the truth goes, you'd probably have to say that God is represented by the framework, all right? That's God. That's representative of God. You'd probably say that the impetus to get this thing moving and to push this thing along is his son, the Lord Jesus Christ. So you don't have pedals and that, you don't have any movement. So there's God, there's his son, the Lord Jesus Christ. Then you've got the wheels, which I've suggested that's us. That's the ecclesia, all right? That's the ecclesia. We're the wheels. We're in motion now because we've got God and we understand Christ and we can see all that. And we've got some wheels and we're moving in a direction, but it's not really moving yet because there's some more integral parts we haven't covered. For example, the spokes. I would suggest to you the spokes are our doctrines, our core beliefs, our statement of faith. All of those things we know are right and all those things we know are wrong, they're not part of the spokes. So all those spokes are part of getting that wheel some strength, some substance to be able to propel us forward. There's still something missing in that. If you don't have this part on a bike, you've got nothing. It's the hubs. And all of those spokes, all of our beliefs, all of our core understandings come back to Israel. Israel is the core section, if you like, of our faith. And I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. No Israel, no heartbeat. It is the heartbeat of our faith. The predominant amount of churches that are out there that are preaching their brand of what they think the Bible teaches do not have any hubs. This is their bike, all right? Without Israel as a major part of our hope, we have absolutely got nothing. We're not going anywhere. We're stuck. And Dr. Thomas knew that and he understood that, and so we've got this really wonderful, well-oiled machine, if I can put it that way, because we have this understanding that Israel is a very central part of our faith and our belief. Very, very, very important that we understand that. And Dr. Thomas gave us that understanding, but it took him nearly 15 years, or close to 15 years, to finally realise how important Israel was as an integral part of our beliefs. So as Christadelphians, we support Israel because now we understand the prophecies, we understand all of the intricacies of Scripture and how it all ties back with God's chosen people. We understand the promises that God has given, which all relate to Israel. Virtually all the prophecies have something to do with Israel. Even though out there prophecies about Britain, it's because Britain will have something to do with Israel. There's prophecies about the end times because all of the end times are connected back to Israel. So everything revolves around Israel. So we, as a community, we financially assist the Jews. I know some people will go, the Jews would be the last people you need to financially assist because they're so wealthy. Not quite true, really, but I remember once, I think I was only going out with Ruth at the time, and I was probably only 16 or 17, and we were up there at Hope Valley where Mum and Dad used to live, and there was a knock at the door, and it was some guy coming around, I think Salvation Army or whoever it was, looking for some funds. And he opened the door, and Dad politely said, "Oh, no, we don't give to the Salvation Army, we give our money to the Jews." What? They give you the money to the Jews? Well, they'd be the last people you give money to. They're so wealthy. But I don't think I'm pretty certain Dad didn't get in a long conversation. But it does sound strange. However, we do part with our money to place that money into a certain area in the Jewish community, which is always those areas that are needed. So the first collection that was ever taken by Christadelphians was on the 19th of July in 1874. Now, Robert Roberts, the brother Thomas had died by this stage, and Robert Roberts could see the importance of Israel through the writings of Dr. Thomas, and he grabbed hold of that and said, you know what, let's not just say this in word that we believe Israel, God's people, let's support them in a practical way. So they took up a collection for the poor Jews in Palestine. Israel wasn't around then, and it was for those Jews that were struggling in Palestine, their ancient old territory. £4 was collected. Doesn't sound much, does it? But in that age, it was worth 920 Australian dollars. So it's not bad for the first collection. The following year, in 1875, there was an annual collection by all Christadelphians in the USA and particularly in England. And there was £131 collected. That's equivalent today of $29,000. Well, there's nowhere near the amount of Christadelphians in that age as there are today in the world, but that's what they collected. Since 1874, Christadelphians worldwide have collected over $4 million for the various Jewish funds, particularly Youth Aliyah. So that's why we support them, brothers and sisters. I'll bless those that bless you. So the connection with Israel is not just a verbal one. It's not just something that we just, say and look at. We are connected in more ways than one, not just in that manner, but also financially we do assist. And by the way, what we give is really negligible. The Pratt family in Melbourne, albeit they are Jews, would give probably $30 million a year, just one family, to the Jews. They are Jewish themselves, so they're also very, very wealthy. But the point we're making is, as a very small community, we don't do too bad in supporting the Jews. We could probably do better. But anyway, just thought we'd put that one out there so you know why there is that financial little connection with the Jews. Now, here's where I want to break away from. That's how we got connected with Israel to start with. But now I want to break away and just show you some of the influences that we've actually had on the Jewish community and on Israel. I guess it's something that some of you will know this, but I think it's important that we understand that it's not just a one-way street, that we're sort of lapping up everything that Israel is putting to us, particularly from the understanding of scriptures, and that's why we're connected. But because we have that feeling, and because Israel means a lot to us, and because they're in our heart, we in actual fact have, sometimes perhaps inadvertently, given more back to them than what any other probably religious community has ever done. And there's some big religious communities out there that do support Israel. But from a very minority religious group, we bat way above our average when it comes to our connection with Israel and our assistance with them. For example, many of you have heard the story of the Kinder Transport program. It's both a sad and a happy policy that was made by the British government just prior to World War II. Nazi Germany were on the move, all right? From 1936 onwards, Hitler had it out for the Jews. Prior to World War II happening, it was really a bad place to be, was in Germany, Austria or Czechoslovakia if you were a Jewish family. You were a targeted race of people. And the mums and dads of these little kiddies could see the writing was on the wall that things were going to go very bad for them as Hitler grew in power, more so as time went on. So there was a movement that started in Britain by various people that we have to get as many Jewish kids out of Europe as we possibly can prior to the war starting, because as soon as the war started, bang, all borders were shut, nobody was allowed to leave as far as Hitler was concerned. So the Kinder Transport was an initiative by the British government to get as many Jewish children out of Europe prior to World War II, and 250 children, might not sound a lot, but just remember, that's 3/4 of the size of Heritage College, kids rolled up on trains into England looking for somewhere to stay, not for a day, not for a week, not for a month, but for years, and 250 of those children went into Christadelphian homes. The Christadelphians put their hands up, over 100 families put their hands up to take these kids for years. It's amazing, an amazing story. And the brother that was behind it all was a brother, Alan Overton, from the Rugby Ecclesia. Art, if you're watching this, that's your ecclesia. Brother Alan Overton was originally from the Rugby area, ecclesia in the United Kingdom, and he had a huge part to play in this program. He actually went to many of the government meetings, he went to many of the proposals, and then he had to go out to the Christadelphian families and say, these kids are on their way, who's going to put their hand up to please help? And bang, 100 families straight away put their hand up for these kids to come into their homes. And I tell you what, these kids, it's a sad story because they arrived, they were put on the train by their mums and dads, waved goodbye as they headed off to another country. They never knew the language, they didn't know anybody. They were on their own, they were distressed, they were traumatised, they, as I said, they couldn't speak English. They get off the train, they don't know what's going on, they've got their little suitcases, and pretty well most of them never saw their parents again, or their older siblings who were too old to be part of this program. So it was imperative that they find safe, kind, caring families to support these particular children. How many people here have heard of Brother Harry Whittaker? I thought maybe the older ones, all right? He passed away a fair while ago now. He's obviously pretty old. He and his wife were one of the families that took on 2 of the children. And I'm going to play a little clip. It goes about 3 or 4 minutes. This is the little clip of Max. His sister Pauline's not in it because sadly she passed away very young, as he'll tell you in the story. They were billeted out to Harry Whittaker and his wife's family with their own children, and they were there for a few years. So here's his story. Now this might have to turn this up a bit, Jordan. Let's see how we go.
Before the war came Max and Pauline. In 1939, and even before that, the world was beginning to be horrified by Hitler's persecution of the Jews. It was, I think, on Christmas Day that the British government had said that they would open the doors to Jewish children, and some others, if they were fully sponsored. This meant, to all intents and purposes, adoption.
My name is Max Rubinstein. I was born on the 24th of June, 1929. My mother was Vera, and my father was Esau. And I had two brothers. George was the oldest, and Robert, who was 1 year younger than him. And my sister Pauline, I am the youngest. We lived by the beach, which was wonderful, until the Germans came in. At Crystal night, we were all in the living room, and somebody threw a rock through our window. My parents said, stay in the house, don't go out. And we heard a lot of noise outside, so we stayed home. My brothers, George and Robert, they were too old to go on the kinder transport. They went to England 1 year before we left. I left Sappat with my sister on May the 3rd, 1939. My parents took us to this bus with other children, and we got on the bus and said goodbye, and that was the last time we ever saw our parents. The bus went through Hamburg, and I saw the Nazis marching. Then we went to the train station, got on the train, wound up in Berlin, and I looked out of the window and I saw Hitlerstrasse with big swastikas on all the buildings. And then finally the train moved and we wound up in Holland. The next day we got on the ship and wound up in England. The Whitakers treated me very well. I loved them. That's how good they were. The Whitakers were Christadelphians, and there were many more Christadelphians in the neighborhood. Most of them took in children from Europe. I had to go to church every Sunday. The Christadelphian people at the church were very nice. My sister got sick, and the Whitakers sent me on vacation to Leeds. So while I was in Leeds, I got a letter telling my sister passed away. And then I went back to the Whitakers, and well, life went on until they sent me away. And then many years later, when we were in England with the Whitaker son, and his wife gave me part of a diary, and I went back to the hotel after we had dinner together, and I read it, and then I realized Pauline had TB and had a spot in my lung. And then I knew they sent me away because they figured their son could die and I could die, but it never happened.
If you could say one thing to the Whitakers today, what would you say to them?
If it wouldn't have been for you people taking Pauline and I in, I probably would have been dead by now. So I'm very happy what you did. Kept me alive.
So there's literally, from that 250 families or children that came into England, there's literally thousands of descendants. Some of them are still in England, some went back to Europe, and a lot of them immigrated to Israel as a result of Christadelphians putting their hands up to bring those kids into their families. So we had a very positive effect on that in that particular way. Now I want to give you another one. This is a story from the United States of America. And this is all about, in 1918, it's about a Christadelphian grandpa who was extraordinarily close to his 10-year-old grandson, and he would always teach him about God's chosen people. And he always taught him, wherever you go, and he used to call him son, wherever you go, son, even though it was his grandson, you make sure you look after the Jews because they're God's chosen people. And that little boy loved his grandpa. There was a real strong connection between grandson and grandpa. And they'd sit for hours and hours discussing the Bible, and particularly more so about the Jews. Well, that young boy, he always remembered what his grandpa taught him, especially about the Jews, and in 1937 he became a congressman in the United States of America, in Texas actually. And as a young congressman, he began to see what was going on in Europe via the newsreels that were getting around the world at the time about Nazi Germany and the Nazis marching and destroying the Jewish shops and really harassing the Jewish people. And he could see there was something going down with the Jewish people, and he wanted to do something about it. Here's the little news clip, or the vision, not so much the narration, but the vision that he saw that really convinced him he had to do something.
Elspeth's story begins in 1933. The Nazis had swept to power. Their stormtroopers were now protected by the government, and one of their favourite excesses, the persecution of Germany's Jews, was now government policy. There were arrests, beatings. Stormtroopers urged people not to shop in Jewish stores.
These clips, and he said, got to do something about it. I remember what my grandpa taught me. I've got to do something about it. So what he did, he actually risked his entire political career, even at the risk of going to jail. And what he did was he forged hundreds of passports to get Jews out of Europe and into the United States via Cuba, because they hadn't fallen out with Cuba at this stage. And that's what this little boy did as a congressman when he grew up, because he remembered this little boy always who listened to his Christadelphian grandpa about the Jews. He remembered about that. Well, it so happened that little boy grew up to become the 36th President of the United States of America, Lyndon Johnson. And he's buried right alongside his grandpa over there in Johnson City. And even though he himself didn't accept the truth, he became, as many Jews will tell you, the greatest supportive president that Jews have ever had in their entire modern day history. In fact, the Haaretz newspaper, which is the leading daily newspaper in Israel, says this: Lyndon Johnson, Israel has had no better friend. He is generally regarded as the president most uniformly friendly to Israel. And a journalist couldn't quite put his finger on why was this man so supportive, and especially in the Six-Day War, by the way, in 1967. He was president, and Israel was confronted by 180 million Arabs that wanted to destroy them. He gave an enormous amount of support to Israel at that particular time. And people would say, why was it that he did this? Well, here's an article that was written in the New Jersey Times not all that long ago that says this, and I hope you can read this from the back, but I'll read it to you anyway. Rather than politics, it was LBJ's paternal grandparents' roots in the Christadelphian Church that was the source of his special concern for Jews. Christadelphians believe that the Jews are God's chosen people and the people of the Bible. Thus, Lyndon Johnson's grandfather, Samuel Johnson Sr., once told Lyndon, "Take care of the Jews. They're God's chosen people. Consider them your friends and help them in any way you can." So Christadelphians have had a mighty, mighty impact on that nation as a result of a grandpa teaching his grandson about the promises made to Israel and about all the things where Israel are involved in our faith. Quite amazing. Quite amazing. I'm going to end off with this man here. Does anyone remember him? I'm sure you do, because he's been on this platform a few times. He was in Rathmines in 2011. Was anyone at that school? You were there, Kerry? Cole? You were there? Pete? Yeah, well, it was quite an interesting school. Probably the first time, I think, they had snipers on the roof, because he was well guarded, on the roof of Elpis Israel House, just peering out, looking to see if there was any misbehaving going on. And the only other time I remember that was when we were hosts for the Young People Weekend once. That was quite an interesting time as well. So he came, Yuval was the Israeli ambassador to Australia, and he absolutely became very well connected with Christadelphians because of the warmth and the friendship that we showed him. He always gave up his time to speak, 5 different occasions. He went to Heritage College twice. He spoke there. He spoke on numerous platforms, Brisbane, Sydney, Adelaide. I don't think he got to Melbourne, but he really enjoyed it. The particular really one was the great time he had in Rathmines in 2011. Anyone that might remember, on that occasion, we taught all the children to sing the Israeli national anthem in Hebrew, all waving flags, and there he is in the middle of them. He could not believe it. He wrote a letter and he said this, he said, "I agree with you," he said, "this is a rare thing. I have never been involved in it before in my life, to be surrounded by non-Jewish kids, Gentile kids, all waving Israeli flags and singing my national anthem in Hebrew." I am blown away, to the point where that photo sat on his embassy desk in Canberra, because he'd never experienced anything like it. He loved everything about the special place in our heart that his country had. His final talk was here in 2014. He left here to go back to Israel. We all thought he was going to retire. He didn't retire. He actually went up the ranks. He became the world's highest ranking Israeli diplomat. He became the right-hand man to Netanyahu, picked him to work alongside of him. And wherever Netanyahu was, he was, because you've got your political head, Netanyahu, and you've got your diplomatic head, Yuval. Both of them always together, working out the policies and how to deal with the issues that faced Israel. He was so connected with us as an organisation, as a religious group, that he himself was open to welcoming Christadelphians to the ministry office. Not just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. He supported in the boardroom of the ministry, Foreign Affairs Ministry office, 50 Christadelphian young people that came along, and he got the whole lot of them up there with him on that particular occasion. He became in control of 130 embassies and ambassadors, 2,500 staff he was in charge of, and he would quite often simply say, "The politicians set the fires and I have to go around putting them out," because that's what diplomats do, right? And he said it was a pretty big task. He was tasked with meeting all these very famous, or not famous so much, but high diplomats themselves, or even political leaders. There's Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Blair, Julie Bishop, he would welcome. There's Prince William. He was there to welcome him, and Chairman Dan over there in Victoria, he's still there as Premier. The Prime Minister of India. It was always Yuval that was the first one to greet, because he's the diplomat. He's the first one to greet anybody that got off the plane, and he would wine and dine them and talk and so on. There he is with Boris Johnson. He even gets to meet at some stage of his career some really big celebrities, including this guy here. Where's Phil Milligan? Eat your heart out, Phil. All right, I think he's 7'5", slightly taller than you. Some basketballer, but I thought that looks quite an interesting photo. King of Spain, as he got off the plane, and he even got to meet the Queen of Sheba, which was nice as well. So that was good. Mike Pence, the Vice President of America at the time, and of course Donald Trump. He got to meet him. Now, when he met this next character, he sent me a text, and with the picture of January 2020. And he sent this message to me that said this: Mike, today I met your mate, Vladimir Putin. So why are we telling you all this? Because Yuval, even though he got to that very elevated spot, and by the way, he's now retired, but he got to that very elevated spot, knew everything that, well, when I say everything, knew the fundamental basic principles of what we knew was going to happen to Israel. He knew it as well. And in 2014, a number of us gave him a farewell dinner at Mount Lofty House. There's a few up there, I think, can remember that event. It was a lovely event, and on that night we did a 20-minute presentation on Ezekiel chapter 37, Valley of the Dry Bones, and told him everything that had happened was God ordained. He's secular, by the way. That means he doesn't necessarily believe in a God as we believe in God. But he was listening intently, as a good diplomat would do, and he listened to that, and then we launched into the next chapter, Ezekiel 38, and we told him, be careful, because one day Russia is going to come down into the Middle East and they are going to invade your country, and you, when you see that happen, Yuval, get your Miri, your kids, and if you've got grandkids, which he has now, you get them and get them out and go across in the Jordan. And he locked that up in his brain. He never ever forgot that. And he was very diplomatic and said, yes, well, you know, that's great. Thank you for sharing that with me. I don't necessarily agree with it. I can't see Russia really doing anything like that in the Middle East, but thanks very much. Well, of course, it was only a couple of years later that Russia moved into Syria, didn't they? And you might remember when a couple of Russian jets strayed over Turkey and they were shot down by the Turkish military. And of course, Putin was infuriated. Well, I decided I'll send Yuval on WhatsApp this little cartoon that appeared in our newspaper. And that little cartoon was simply this. It simply says, it must have been happening around November when all this went down. What is Putin having for Thanksgiving? Well, he's going to have turkey. All right, and I sent that to him with a little caption underneath, it's all happening to plan. Because it was only probably 18 months earlier that we'd told him all about what was going to be going on, and Russia was going to come down in the Middle East and they're going to start exerting their muscles. You be careful, you need to watch all this. And his reply to me was this. He said, I guess it gives your belief some sense that you might be right at the end of the day. And you know, since that time, brethren and sisters, and young people, we have had a lot of discussions with Yuval, and he can see what's going on. He can see how Russia is really, you know, flexing their muscles and not sure which way it's all going, but they are very, very fearful of Russia in Syria, and they're very mindful that they are not showing their true hand in what's going on in the world. And he said, I've never forgotten what you've said, and I know that what you've said, if it comes to pass, it's locked up in here. So, in conclusion, brothers and sisters, we have had a very strong, unique bond with Israel because of this book, because of the Bible, because of the hard work of our pioneers, and that was built upon by many, many other brethren throughout the years. And we have had a very significant effect over Israel ourselves as a community, a very small community, but we have. I guess the takeaway story of this is that we do have a unique bond with Israel, not just modern day with the likes of Yuval and the many thousands of descendants that are alive now because we took Jews in from Second World War, not just because that, but because of our Bible, our scriptures, and because we know that Israel, although they're going to be in for a very difficult time, brothers and sisters and young people, we know that's coming up. We also know that if you're connected with Israel, you're going to enjoy those wonderful times when they're going to be elevated above every nation on this planet once they've been humbled, once they believe who their true Messiah is and worship their true Messiah, and all those prophecies come together to be fulfilled. We know all about that. We've known about it for 176 years, and we're very thankful for the likes of Dr. Thomas for having given us that. That is why, brothers and sisters, it's very, very important that we continue to have Israel as the heartbeat of our hope.